What's the story of the New Orleans place that you know of?
Yeah, there's a skyscraper that was once a prominent center of trade and business. Giant office building, 60 stories. When you're driving through downtown, or you're driving to downtown New Orleans on the interstate, it's one of the most prominent buildings. It's like directly next to the interstate system.
Yeah.
And at one point, it was fully occupied. I think it was maybe the World Trade Center or something like that. It was a prominent building in the city. And it's either after Katrina or shortly after that, it had some flooding, the windows got busted out, something like that, and the building got condemned.
Yeah.
Actually, let's pause here a moment to appreciate the absolute catastrophe that is Plaza Tower in New Orleans. Built in 1969 for a cool $18 million, which, when adjusted for inflation, is a whopping $155 million, this 44-story skyscraper was once the largest building in the entire city. Quite the architectural flex, until it wasn't. Fast forward to 2002, the building was abandoned when asbestos was discovered throughout the entire structure. You know, just a tiny problem for anybody who enjoys breathing. Still, developers had grand plans to renovate it, but then Hurricane Katrina rolled up and, kind of like an uninvited guest, ruined the entire party. By 2010, Plaza Tower was put up for sale for $15.5 million. Not too bad, except it ended up selling at auction in 2011 for, wait for it, $650,000, or the average price for a 4-bedroom in your local suburban area. But this was an entire skyscraper. Adjusting for inflation, that's nearly a 97% decrease in value since it was built. Talk about a discount. The building was riddled with asbestos and needed remediation that took 20 years off everybody's patience. It changed hands multiple times after Hurricane Katrina, sparking multi-million-dollar insurance disputes because, you know, even skyscrapers have drama. And then came Jaeger Development, who, bless their optimism, bought the building in the hopes to make some magic happen. Spoiler alert, magic did not happen. But here's where things get absolutely wild. In May 2021, debris fell from the top of the building and hit a nearby passerby. The city responded by having safety nets installed across the top of the building because, you know, falling chunks of skyscraper aren't a part of your standard safety policies. Then came January 2022 when a fire broke out throughout the building because why not? By October 2022, things got even weirder when the local news channel caught local graffiti artists climbing up 80 feet like they were auditioning for some kind of Cirque du Soleil, but with spray paint. January 2023 brought with it more falling debris, forcing street closures all around the building. And this is all while Jaeger is trying to secure $150 million from lenders across the country to secure their development. But at this point, Plaza Tower had turned from a skyscraper into something more like a public giant safety hazard. And then tragedy struck again in April of 2023 when a man actually fell from his death after, you guessed it, another fire broke out in the building. You would think that this would be rock bottom, but no. Jaeger vented their frustrations in a couple text messages that were eventually leaked, calling the city a hindrance to their project and securing financing. In quote, "It's been too much hassle with various departments that don't have any clue what it takes to do a $160 million project by a local developer in this city." Translation, Plaza Tower broke them. Finally, this past January, after 14 years of ownership, the city issued a green light to demolish the building against the current owner's wishes. Because apparently having falling chunks of skyscraper raining down on pedestrians isn't ideal for public infrastructure. So there you have it, Plaza Tower, the commercial real estate version of Murphy's Law. If something could go wrong here, it absolutely did. It's in a place like New Orleans, commercial real estate is not dead. The prime real estate at the corner of Main Street and Main Street is still going to be highly sought after. But these periphery buildings, I mean, there's many that have been abandoned for years all throughout that central area, as opposed to a place like New York where, I mean, every time if you wait a year to go back to New York, the skyline in a place like Brooklyn will look completely different. You can't make a block in some of those areas without seeing a lot completely cleared where a brand new mega monolith is going to be erected.
Yeah, and so we mentioned ever since COVID that really office space has dropped off the face of the earth almost. Like there's no demand.
Yeah,
hard demand for
COVID
office
popped
space.
commercial real estate.
Yeah.
It popped the commercial real estate bubble.
Yeah.
It was going to go that direction anyway, as the necessity of having all of your employees in one central location was going to be slowly rolled out with the invention of products like Zoom and the interconnectedness of the
Even just
internet.
FaceTime and the internet.
Yeah, as simple as that. Where if you're just pushing paper, you can do a lot of that work from home. Why do you need to go into an office? Just to make sure you're working, I guess. But
as long as you complete your set schedule of what your boss wants you to do, doesn't matter if you do it from home or an office space. No.
yeah, if you're in sales and you need, your clientele is going to be in and around the area that you're marketing to, then there is utility in having a centralized location that we can just easily get in your car, go 5 minutes down the road and just be at the client's place. But to me, the primary function of office space today and that type of commercial real estate is almost solely collaboration.
Yeah.
And for that, it's crucial. You can't replace the energy of being in the same space and bouncing ideas off one another. But if you're literally a secretary filling out paperwork, there's no reason, in my opinion, to have to do that in a cubicle as opposed to at your desk with your own coffee and food and all of that.
Yeah, and then
To me, it can actually be more of a distraction to be in the office place.
So then we went into the concept of how, as an investment, real estate, based off the numbers of how real estate's performed over the past 10, 20, 30 years, of how it's actually been more profitable to be in real estate versus like the standard equity investment of the S&P 500 and stocks and bonds and stuff like that. It slightly outperformed it, not including, I would say, you have insurance, repair, vacancies, all those kinds of things. But that real estate is highly illiquid, whereas stocks and bonds and equities are very liquid and you could sell them at the drop of the hat. So that is a big advantage of the stocks and bonds over going into real estate, was that you could basically get cash, you liquidate what you have in it at a moment's notice, whereas real estate, it's illiquid. You have to like sell it. I left that off. Real estate is illiquid. You have to sell it, and it can take some time to liquidate the cash that you have tied up in real estate.
Yeah, and commercial real estate, I mean, we saw it in COVID. I actually had a big decision when I first got into the business. I got licensed in January of 2020, right before COVID hit. And I was going to do all these things, and I was debating whether to move to the city or stay where I was. And a big factor was, do I go all in on commercial real estate or do I go all in on residential? Because I was doing both at the time. I was doing a lot of commercial leases and actually had an office building for sale in the neighborhood where your parents used to live at the very front for $1.2 million. It was as prime as it got at that time for what commercial real estate was. It was a giant building leased out by an insurance agency that had amazing returns. On paper, it made total sense. But then COVID hit, and the market just completely pulled back. And so for commercial real estate, it's a black swan event can come and completely cripple the market like a COVID could or like a hurricane could. Whereas I think residential is a little bit safer, but it's still exposed to the same kind of risk. But I saw it with my own eyes how that bubble can pop overnight in commercial real estate.
Yeah.
It did.
But what would you say your thesis on stocks and equities versus real estate?
Well, I'm not a financial advisor, so I can't comment on what somebody should do, but just my own perspective, the benefit, there are certain advantages of investing in real estate that only come with investing in real estate. For commercial residential property, you have a lot of tax benefits. And so if you have a high salary and you want to write off some of those expenses, you can use the depreciation of the property as a tax benefit to pay less income taxes. That's one of the big advantages of it. It's also viewed commonly as being more stable and secure than the stock market can be. Whether or not that's true is definitely up to debate, but there are certain perks and advantages of investing in real estate. Another big one is that you get constant cash flow if you're investing. So you're investing in something to the average American, why it makes a lot of sense for them, why they swear by investing in real estate is because you can touch it. I can go walk to the thing that I own that is making me money and put my hand on the wall and step inside and look at it. But at the same time, it's exposed to insurance, like you said, taxes, maintenance, upkeep, hurricanes,
earthquakes,
yeah,
fires.
yeah.
And we mentioned that in the United States, we don't have to worry about that, but real estate has an inherent risk in the entire world of political violence where your own country could go into civil war and or a neighboring country can attack and just take your real estate.
Well, there's also the risk. I mean, I've never seen it in my life. I've never seen it here, but there's a concept called eminent domain where the government can take over a large swath of land.
Usually they reimburse, though.
They do, but if they don't, then it's inverse condemnation, where you have to sue for a claim to get the proper just price for it, to be properly reciprocated.
And so that went into the topic of discussion of what I see as like, there's something I've come up with called like the golden real estate, which I view to be extremely hyper useful real estate and a good investment, which would be like, can be, but it would be stuff like beachfront properties. Of course, the number one rule of real estate is location. So like beachfront properties, land that is useful, that you can farm, harvest, timber, and crops and things of that nature that have less risk versus housing real estate where it's like the equity is tied up in a literal building kind of thing. Whereas like the golden real estate I per se say is like a lot of your value is tied up in the location or the land itself, the land having utility value, and the location meaning you're right next to a beach, you're right next to mountains, you're right next to things of desire that people would want to be at. So for me, from a real estate perspective, I think that's some of the best investment that you can actually do in terms of golden real estate. Whereas in regular everyday real estate, it's literally the house itself. And there can be so many things that can go wrong where you could have termites, hurricanes, things of that nature. Not to say that a beachfront property, you don't run the risk of a hurricane, but...
Well, for a beachfront property specifically, in the areas that shot up the most since the COVID boom were areas like Texas and Florida, specifically for beachfront property, Florida. Those returns were, never seen before. It's ridiculous how much those properties appreciated in a matter of months. Florida now is at a very high risk for, some people would make the case that that bubble's already popped, that those properties are going down. I think together Florida and Texas hold 20% of all listings in the entire country right now. 2 states.
Wow.
Even compared to California, New York, the entire Northeast coast, it's ridiculous. And Florida's getting specifically hammered by rising insurance costs. You can no longer get a 30-year mortgage for a condominium complex, which is a lot of those beachfront properties. They're definitely on a much more downward trajectory, where if you had somebody, which they have, thousands upon thousands of sales last year, where somebody would have bought one of those places. A lot of it's going to be second homes, people from out of state who are looking for a getaway, and then maybe they're not utilizing it as much as they could. The returns aren't as much, and they have to sell it. They're taking huge, massive losses right now. And I don't know when that market's going to bottom up, because they shot up so freaking much. And it only looks like they're going to be continuing to get more inventory. The risk of the housing bubble is you can't really apply it to the entire country because every state, every metropolitan area, every suburban area is entirely different than its next door neighbor, and especially the country at large. When people talk about the housing economy is on the verge of collapsing, what does that mean? If you're talking about the hundreds of millions of houses across the entire country, all of their values are going to go down? No, that's ridiculous. That's like saying the stock market's going down. When the stock market is crashing, you may see the top performers going down because they're so overinflated. There's always going to be some sector that is on the rise. People investing in different commodities, like you said, gold earlier, or bond yields are going to go up. There's always an opportunity to make money. In our market where we are, the projection is for housing, for prices to continue to rise, and for inventory to remain where it is. In New Orleans, they're projected to continue to fall by 3%, they say, this year. And so that's literally separated by 30 miles. Imagine if you're looking at an economist talking about the housing market in New York City or Atlanta, and you're trying to apply that to your decision to buy or sell in Mandeville, Louisiana, you would have a completely skewed view of what's actually going on and what your value would be or your ability to sell it.
Yeah, and then I want to go into my family does real estate. My grandmother and grandpa did real estate. And at the time, they were able to, they grew up in the Great Depression, so they were able to save their money, and they worked humble jobs of being a teacher, and my grandpa set up the telephone lines of AT&T, a blue-collar working position. But between a teacher and that and a blue-collar job, they were able to save money, buy land with cash, not finance it, and then just keep doing that over and over again because the median wage matched the price of housing across the U.S., so they're able to do that. Whereas now the opportunity of just buying places in cash, everything's very expensive now due to inflation and other things, where it's the common man is almost forced into a 30-year mortgage, and it can take, you said if they paid an extra mortgage payment per year, it would lower it from 30 years to 20.
Yeah, if you make one extra mortgage payment, so if your mortgage payment every month is $1,700, and in the scope of 12 months, you pay an extra $1,700, and you do that every year, you'll shave off 7 years of your mortgage, and that compounds the more that you put into it.
But even then, it's that makes it where it's you're paying off your mortgage in 23 years, where it's okay, your best investment, it takes 23 years of your life, and we're living in a time where people don't even buy their first property or home until they're 35. Okay, well, you're nearly 60 by the time you actually own your home. You're pretty much retirement, which means that your biggest investment was your house, and you're now 60. You're way less risk adverse. You have kids and things like that. So it's that is your only. It's kind of a bleak place to be, in my opinion, as far as the American dream. It's not like it used to be, in a sense.
I think one thing, though, that I would comment about that is that my grandparents my great-grandparents lived through the Depression.
Uh-huh.
They lived through World War I, the Depression, World War II, and everything following. They died when they were in their late 90s. Mm-hmm. So I saw the whole expanse of the 20th century. It's pretty crazy. But my grandmother was she cut hair for a living, and my grandfather was an accountant. And what they did is they lived off of my grandmother's salary, and every dollar that my grandfather made, they invested, or they just saved. But they were so frugal, you can't imagine the kind of things that they would do in order to save money. They would save every penny. They would make it count. They would, when they used to deliver milk to your house in a glass jar, they would save every single one of them and repurpose them for a various product. If you got takeout from a Chinese restaurant, you got those plastic bins, they would save every single one of them. They would make their own clothes. they farmed in their little garden, in their suburban home that was like 7 by 7, but that little garden was enough to generate all of the vegetables that they ever needed to buy in any given year. They saved as much as they possibly could. Today, we're dominated by consumer culture, where the average American, even if let's say if they're just above living paycheck to paycheck, say they have a mortgage, they own a home, and they're going about their lives. Obviously, they have many expenses. If they have kids, they got to pay for their insurance, they got to pay for their car note, they got to pay for all these things. But the culture at large, especially people who will be entering into the market at age 35, 30, whatever, is dominated by frivolous things where I actually tracked how much my wife and I got, how much we paid for takeout every year. Tracked it over the course of an entire year. We alternate every weekend, and it's our date night thing. On Fridays, we get takeout. And it's $24 here, $30 there, maybe 35 if we go to a different place. But that added up to us spending $3,000 annually just on takeout. But I want to do that. It's a special night. We love doing it. It's fun. I wouldn't give that up. But that's also a product of the 21st century, that I have the means to do that and that I want to do that. But if you were to spend, I mean, that's 2 mortgage payments right there.
Yeah.
That you could be dumping into your house. That's $3,000 that if you started at age 25 and were putting that amount every year into a secure investment, would grow by the time you were getting towards that retirement period into something you can't imagine. I saw the statistic today. If you invested $10,000 into the stock market in 1975, today it would be worth $6.3 million.
Yeah. Well,
but the average American is not doing that. They're buying clothes and sunglasses and cool things and this and that.
Yeah, I think the dream, though, of the average American is to be able to do that and to afford owning whole plots of land and stuff like that together.
Well, it's priorities.
Yeah.
You have to pay yourself so that you can have a bright future.
Yeah, and so we looked up the statistic of 58 millionaires exist in the world, and 22 of those millionaires are in the United States. So to put it in perspective, if you take 4 of Louisiana's entire population, that's how many millionaires exist in the U.S. For Louisiana of the entire state's population, because it's about around 4 million that live in Louisiana.
Yeah.
Which is like, pretty much that shows how much money is actually out there due to inflation and the printing of dollars and stuff like that, and how many $1 million properties exist. As far as I'm concerned, it looks like real estate, is really high. It almost looks like a bubble to me across the board in a sense.
Wait, based on what though? Based on that their wealth is tied up in their properties.
Yeah, because if all the millionaires in the U.S. decided to liquidate their equity and try to realize that millionaire into $1 million, everything would crash. Because if all the millionaires tried to do it at once, it'd be like, okay, well, no one's going to pay that. Because those are the ones who can afford that. That's
what happened in the Great Depression.
Yeah.
Everybody went en masse to withdraw their money from the bank, and it wasn't backed by anything.
Yeah, so I see some things are very expensive across the board, and not just real estate, but groceries and all the other facets of daily life. So
I agree with that. Yeah, there's one other thing I wanted to add on the risk of investing in real estate. A lot of people will apply what's called the BRRRR method.
Yeah.
It's kind of a concept that arose, I think, in the 90s, maybe late 80s, where basically the way that the method is supposed to work the most efficiently is you save up in cash enough to buy your first investment property outright, to where you don't have a note on it. Preferably, you're going to be buying something that is, obviously you want to get a deal. The way you get a deal typically is through a slightly distressed property. Term in the industry they use sometimes is called putting lipstick on a pig, where basically structurally everything might be fine, the roof is okay, the AC, the major expenses, and what somebody will do to completely change the feel of the place, the cosmetic allure, is they'll come in and change the floors and paint, and they call it fully renovated. So what they do, you buy the distressed property, you do some renovations to it, you rent it out, and then you refinance it based on the rental income that you have coming in with no debt. And then you take that extra equity, say if you bought it for $225,000, you put $25,000 into it. Now you have it rented. The bank says it's now worth $275,000 or $300,000. So you've realized an extra $50,000 in equity to roll into another property. And that process continues and continues and continues to where very quickly you can generate a large and expansive income generating portfolio where you're rolling the equity back into the properties that you're refinancing. You're
The
rolling
danger
the
of
rent back
that
into
is
it.
if you get into an economic downturn where you're having trouble filling vacancies and your properties are now worth less than what you purchased for them, you can bust.
100%. It's high risk, high reward.
Yeah.
The person who runs a large real estate investment association where we live, I got to sit down with her for a couple hours and pick her brain on her journey investing. She started out with just a regular job. I think she was managing a marina. I mean, not high income yielding, but enough to where she was able to invest. She's the head of the investor association. Mm-hmm. She's getting into large commercial projects now with pools of investors. But she took heavy losses, was completely underwater for her first 5 projects. Then she broke even. Then she made a slight profit, then a slightly bigger one. And that's the thing too, is that where the danger lies in a lot of investment property is that it is easier to understand what it is and how you make money from it because, like I said, it's a physical asset that you can touch, you can rub your hand on the wall. But a lot of people, I think, have a false impression of they oversimplify everything that goes into it.
They make it sound like it's so easy to do. It's like
you see people like that all the time.
There's a lot of hard work that goes into it, and there's a lot of miscalculation that you can 100%. Run into. Yeah.
Yeah.